A cry was heard. It was a cry of thirst, a cry of desperation, inspiration was out of sight. No hope to reach the unseen light. A light of hope that illumines the way to blissfulness. The quench the thirst of the hopelessness.
Through hymns we will go, through hymns we will share, through hymns we let them know that Jesus cares. Through hymns we will praise, through hymns we will bless, and lift him high and draw men unto him.
He's worthy of all praise. Show them He's huge for the Lord.
It's huge for the Lord.
Unite us all as one, so we can have this mode of love in our heart. Yeah, all we need is you to lead us to proclaim, to enhance this mission in this dying world.
Through hymns we will go, through hymns we will share, through hymns we let them know that Jesus cares. Through hymns we will praise, through hymns we will bless, and lift him high to draw all men unto him. Through hymns we will go, through hymns we will share, through hymns we let them know that Jesus cares. Through hymns we will go, through hymns we will share, through hymns we let them know that Jesus cares. Through hymns we will praise,
Through hymns we will bless, and lift him high to draw all men.
through hymns we will go,
Through
through
hymns
hymns we will share,
we will
through hymns we let them know that Jesus cares.
Jesus cares.
Through hymns we will praise, through hymns we will bless, and lift him high and draw all men unto him.
Unto him.
And lift him high and draw all men unto him.
When darkness filled the sky, that day that Jesus died, in agony upon the bitter cross, they took his body down and laid it in the tomb. His friends believed that everything was lost. But when the third day came and darkness turned to light, for Mary heard her name and saw the living Christ risen to set the captives free, risen to ransom you and me, to bind up every broken heart, to conquer death and sin. risen to bring us home again. Ooh. And in that barren place, the world forever changed. For hope was born when Jesus rose that day. And still his wounded hand revealed the love he has for every fallen soul he came to save. And he will come again, and one by one will rise to praise his holy name and see the living Christ risen to set the captives free, risen to ransom you and me, to bind up every broken heart, to conquer death and sin, risen to bring us home again. Hallelujah, he lives. Hallelujah, he is risen to set the captives free, risen to ransom you and me, to bind up every broken heart, to conquer death and sin, risen to bring us home again.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Sé que cada decisión tiene una consecuencia. Yo no sé si tú estarías dispuesto a tomar el lugar de alguien. Y a veces no entiendo mucho el gran amor que Cristo tuvo de tomar nuestro lugar, a pesar de que fueron nuestros pecados. Isaías 53, del 3 al 5, dice así: despreciado y desechado entre los hombres, varón de dolores, experimentado en sufrimiento y como que escondimos de él el rostro. Fue menospreciado y no lo estimamos. Ciertamente, él llevó nuestras enfermedades, sufrió nuestros dolores, pero nosotros lo tuvimos por azotado, como herido y afligido por Dios. Mas él fue herido por nuestras rebeliones, molido por nuestros pecados. Para darnos la paz, cayó sobre él castigo, y por sus llagas fuimos nosotros curados. Con ladrones murió, por mi culpa Jesús pagó. Fue maltratado, mucho él sufrió. Mis pecados él los recibió. Sin ver bondad lloró, porque fue por mi pecado que Jesús pagó. Fue maltratado por querer amar, y todo esto fue en mi lugar. Se entregó por mí, murió para salvar en la cruz. Jesús tomó mi lugar. Amor así jamás existirá. Se entregó solo para salvar. con ladrones murió, por mi culpa Jesús su vida dio. Fue maltratado, mucho él sufrió por mis pecados, él los recibió sin ver bondad. Lloró porque fue por mi pecado que Jesús pagó. Fue maltratado por querer amar, y todo esto fue en mi lugar. Se entregó por mí, murió para salvarme en la cruz. Jesús tomó mi lugar. Amor así jamás existirá. Se entregó solo para salvar. Muerto fue Jesús, Cordero de Dios, Señor, Señor de la cruz, eternamente Rey. Amor así jamás existirá. Todo para siempre mi lugar. Muerto fue Jesús, Cordero de Dios, Señor, Señor de la cruz, eternamente Rey. Amor así jamás existirá. Todo para siempre mi lugar. Amor así jamás, jamás existirá. Tomó para siempre mi lugar. Amén.
have fled to my refuge and breathed out my woe. How often when trials like sea billows roll, have I hidden in thee, O thou rock of my soul. Hiding in thee, hiding in thee, thou blessed rock of ages, I'm hiding in thee. I'm hiding in thee. I'm hiding in thee. All safe to the rock that is higher than I. Thou blessed rock of ages, I'm hiding in thee. Hiding in thee. Hiding in thee. Thou blessed rock of ages, I'm hiding in thee.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Yo no sé cuál es la forma en la que podemos demostrar amor. Cada vez que recuerdo a Cristo en una cruz, siendo el rey de todo, absolutamente todo, y sabiendo que Él dio todo por nosotros hasta su propia vida, es que no explico cuán grande fue su amor. No cabe en mi mente eso. Quería compartir con ustedes Lucas 23, desde el 44, dice así. Cuando era la hora sexta, hubo tinieblas sobre toda la tierra hasta la hora novena. El sol se oscureció y el velo del templo se rasgó por la mitad. Entonces Jesús, clamando a gran voz, dijo: Padre, en tus manos encomiendo mi espíritu. Habiendo dicho esto, expiró. Imagina cuánto dolor Jesús pasó. Imagina ver su rostro y su mirar. Ver los clavos en sus manos y en sus pies. Azotado Él fue, rechazado Él fue. Él era rey, coronado fue, mas su corona era de espinos. Fue por amor, fue por amor que Jesús se entregó, que su sangre derramó. Fue por ti, Fue por mí que el precio pagó, por amor nos salvó. Yo no soy merecedor de este favor, soy tan pobre, miserable pecador. En el Calvario mi Jesús se entregó, el Cordero de Dios, el Hijo de Dios, sobre sí llevó toda culpa y dolor. Por sus heridas Él nos salvó. Fue por amor que Jesús se entregó, que su sangre derramó. Fue por mí, fue por ti, que el precio pagó, por amor nos salvó. Sacrificio Él hizo, aceptó morir en nuestro lugar. Fue por amor, fue por amor, fue por ti. Fue por amor, fue por amor que Jesús se entregó, que su sangre derramó. Fue por ti, fue por mí, que el precio pagó. Por amor Él nos salvó. Yo no soy merecedor de este favor, aún así Jesús me acepta con amor. Amén.
What's love got to do with it? Join us here again at the Temple City Seventh-day Adventist Church with Pastor Brett and also Pastor Baptiste. I'm Dr. Stanley James. We're resuming our series entitled Beyond White Supremacy. Well, this week was particularly interesting. We actually saw that this virus has entered into the most pious place in England, the very Palace of London. There we have a woman from America of a darker hue, married to rich royal blood. While we don't want to talk about it, there's a lot of uncomfortable people about that marriage. And while it seems to have had its honeymoon, that honeymoon seems to come to a screeching halt. And now the wife is running out with tales to tell, and everyone is listening. What's love got to do with it? On this last kingdom of European domination, we see that the virus of superiority and inferiority affects everyone. We saw that the whole city, the capital of the United States, freedom, where freedom rings, was assaulted by militiamen who were seeking to establish their view of what is right. Yes, friends, this white supremacy has occupied much of the literature and the news. We saw a Black Lives Matter riot around the world. Something is happening. An invisible kingdom is becoming plain to sight. Well, You may be wondering, why do we have to talk about this? And why do we have to deal with this in church? Well, what's love got to do with it? Ask Harry and Miss Markel. It has everything to do with it. And we're going to discover today, as we did, that the world is at war. We're going to discover where the war is, why we're at war, and what you can do to win the war for the right person. And we will see in Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 11. It says, "The serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild animals, and the Lord God had made. One day he asked the woman, 'Did God really say you must not eat of the fruit from any of the trees in the garden?'" Well, here we see a very familiar story. Adam and Eve sitting there in the garden. And I don't know what it was like, but I can imagine that those mangoes were large and the strawberries were particularly sweet. And if you like pears, the pears had nectar that would leave crystals of sugar running down your throat as you began to participate. And of course, they'd go for bathing in great deep rivers, and Adam and Eve would begin to learn about nature. One writer says he actually has the ability to have conversation, communion with cells in plants. He knew a mitochondria produced ATP. Yes, he understood the organelles had colligative properties that kept Golgi apparatus in the distal section and mitochondria nucleus in the center. You don't know much about that, but this is the deep science that Adam knew. An intelligent man he was. And his wife was equally as intelligent. She was his equal. Though they had different responsibilities, they were equal in intelligence and ability. They complemented each other. What's love got to do with it? Well, friends, wouldn't you like to be able to say, as Adam did at the end of Genesis chapter 2, "I'm naked and not ashamed. I can tell my deepest secrets and have my deepest fears revealed to my partner and have no shame." Not just physically naked, but emotionally naked, spiritually naked. That there's some quirks and some things about you that you can reveal and no way feel shame. Well, in Genesis chapter 3, the devil knew that he wanted to break that peace. And I want you to know, friends, if you're in a family today, it's the devil's aim to destroy that peace, that vulnerability, that joy, that romance, that honeymoon. If he can crush that party with shame, guilt, or fear, he would be successful. Genesis 3 says that this was a serpent that was smart. He was subtle. He was wise. He was manipulative. He was deceptive. And what he wanted to do is appeal to two things. One, pride, and then put you in fear. The devil will always appeal to your ego to cause pride and then put you in a place of condemnation and shame and fear. Through these two agencies, he controls the world. He seduced her by pride. He says, wouldn't you like to know more? As a matter of fact, God doesn't want you to know as much as he really tells you he wants you to know. There are secrets. I know in my life, sometimes I feel that there's some forbidden fruit, things that I would like to do. And I begin to wonder, why does God prohibit me from having access to certain things? Why can't I enjoy certain liberties? And not only on one occasion, I've gone in to touch those cookies in that cookie jar only to discover that they were hot and was burned. I have a sister, Lisa. My mom said, do not touch the glass candy. Glass candy was candy that she'd make in pans. I had the most wonderful mother, a beautiful woman, a tender woman. And occasionally, though she had 5 children, a single parent, she'd have time to put things together and create little tender gifts and candy. Well, this glass candy would be on the stove, and it was sitting there. Lisa, a very intelligent one and very curious, one day my mom said, do not touch it. A forbidden fruit. And mom wasn't there and I wasn't there, and we just heard yelling, ow! She had plunged her finger into this hot glass candy which had just pulled out of the oven and was now cooling off, and her fingers had balled up into blisters. Well, her story is all of our stories, forbidden fruit. But more than a blistering finger, when Eve ate of that fruit, and her husband came and he saw her, bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh, he might have been toiling a little ways over in another hill, and sweat running down his brow, coming ready to eat his meal. Adam saw his bride, and there she was, as he saw in the end of chapter 2, They were one, naked and not ashamed. They shared so many wonderful stories. Pillow talk was wonderful in the Garden of Eden. Can you imagine talking about the plants and the animals and nature and God and temptation, that there will be an evil one that will come? But this time she was different. The devil had seduced her to bite of that fruit. And for a moment she felt exhilarated, almost felt as if she was on top of the world. I don't know if she had tingles in her scalp. I don't know if her lips began to tremble. I don't know if she was clairvoyant and she could begin to see things that she had never seen before. But she said something was different. It isn't unusual that when you violate God's principles, for a moment it would appear that you're enlightened. For a moment it seems like things are better. And she called Adam, and Adam said, Eve. And he saw her smooth skin, and her sultry lips, and her wonderful hair, and her tremendous shape. He was drawn to her, and he could smell the fragrance of food in the distance, but there was something in her hand. And she said, Adam, come in. And he looked and said, what have you done? You're in the center of the garden near a tree called Forbidden, and there is a strange fruit in your hand. I want you to know, friends, he had an option at this time. Adam could have chosen right then to say, you have violated God's commandment. But there was something pulling him, and that was passion, and there was something pushing him, and that was principle. He knew what he ought to do, but it wasn't what he wanted to do, because she just wasn't a woman. She was a part of him. He had now a weakness to her. You ought to be careful who you mingle with and become attached to. That person can affect your eternal destination. If Adam himself had to choose between his wife and his God, there in the Garden of Eden, battling the battle of eternity, and ages would come and consequences would be real, Adam chose her over him. He said, come on, Adam. And he looked at her, and he took the fruit out of her hand as she raised it to his face. He knew what he was doing. He was not plunging just him into the abyss of sin. He was plunging you and me. Why? Because we were both in Adam. We were in Adam. You and I were in Adam. There's something called epigenetics, that the things that your parents had done affects you. Did you know that there's some inherited and cultivated tendencies in the physical? So it is in the spiritual. We were in Adam. And when Adam looked at her and said, if loving you is wrong, I don't want to be right, he ate of that fruit with tears in his eyes, knowing that he had plunged you and me into a dependency, an addiction, a new nature, into death. They reasoned once that happened, and they noticed that something was different. Their conscience was affected. The light had gone out, and Adam could look at her and she could look at him and say, we are different. Well, the passage is very clear, and you've seen it. It says it right there in that very familiar passage, Genesis chapter 3, and it says, Adam and his wife knew. And we see in the verse 6, the woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful. It looked good and delicious. She wanted the wisdom it could give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate. Then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate too. At that very moment, verse 7, their eyes were open. Have you ever seen it where your eyes have been open? That there's an invisible kingdom, that there's some things that were around you all along that you didn't know was there, that nature has revealed things you've taken for granted. The text says, at that very moment they were open, and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. What are your fig leaves? What things do you do to cover yourself? We all have them, because we all were born in sin and shapen in iniquity. There are some things about you that you don't feel good about. There may be the fact that it's the color of your skin. You came in an empire that said you are the wretched of the earth. You've been told by every country that you go on, you are a marked man. People would automatically assume that you're a criminal or you're a thief. Maybe it's your accent. That when you speak and you're from Latin America, people automatically assume that you're here illegal. What's your fig leaf? Have you come here and maybe from Dominican Republic, maybe from Mexico, maybe from Puerto Rico, maybe from Peru, and you know that people are wondering, are you legal? What's your fig leaf? Because there's shame in your life. Maybe you came from a single parent home and you grew up with multiple kids and the people around you look down on you because of your background. Or maybe you came here from a part of Europe that people don't understand. The Eastern Europeans are viewed differently from the Western Europeans, and you had to fight the battles that you had to fight and scars that you had to overcome. You've got fig leaves. Maybe you had been molested and it's been traumatized you and people knew. Maybe you're obese and as a result you're trying to lose weight and you hide yourself in shame. I don't know what your fig leaf is, but there's something that you do to cover that thing about you that says you're not enough. The world is a cruel place. And you may have grown up in your Garden of Eden in your family and your parents looked at you, but you stepped out and faced the cool wind. People are cruel. You discovered, if it's not the texture of your hair, the shape of your teeth, your athletic abilities, the fact that you can't sing, you feel that you're not enough. And you've got the fig leaf. Well, I know for me, I had some fig leaves. I had the fig leaf. If I got enough education, I'd overcome my negritude, the fact that I was not enough. And maybe if I got enough money, I could wipe away all mom's tears. For 5 children, for a single parent, was a lot. I don't know what your fig leaves is, but you may have some. You may have come in as an immigrant and said, if I make enough money, then I could finally be equal to and not less than. Maybe you've got enough education. If I get my kids medical degrees and dental degrees and doctorate degrees, and finally we can escape the shame, only to discover that you're still looked at through the lens of somebody that sees himself better. We all have fig leaves and they get, maybe your fig leaves is your church. If I keep the Sabbath, if I eat the right food, if I give enough tracts and I get enough stars in my crown, if I get on a vegetarian diet, if I pay double tithe, there's something I have to do to be made enough. If you don't feel secondary in front of people around you, many of you still are hiding from God. And the fig leaves are not just from you, among you, but these fig leaves are also to prepare you to face God, because many of us are still struggling with the fact that we're just not enough. Well, friends, if your fig leaves has been identified, is your religion, your education, your money, your ethnicity. Marilyn Markle has a fig leaf. She thought, maybe I could become a princess. Only to discover she's still not enough. These fig leaves don't work. And Jesus will come now in the cool of the evening. The Bible says Jesus shows up as he normally would. Jesus is coming to have haystacks. He's coming ready to be with his friends and his family. But something happened to them, but it didn't happen to Christ. They saw themselves as less than and not equal to Christ, was seeing them still as his bride who he was waiting to see. As a matter of fact, Jesus is coming, hoping to see them as he normally would, to meet in the part of the garden where they normally would be. And Jesus cries out, Adam, where are you? And what an interesting question. Where are you? And Adam, of course, thinking in his mind, oh, here comes Jesus. He's going to see me naked. I've got to hide. What's amazing is you often see yourself in a way that God doesn't see you. Adam is hiding. Adam says, I've got to cover up, to cope. And so he's hiding underneath the trees. The very tree that he had dominion over now has to cover him. Adam is wearing fig leaves, because God is coming. Has God come to you in the cool of your conscience? I want you to know, friends, there is a judgment coming. God is coming back for his bride. And many of us seem to think that he's coming as a jailer to jail us. He's coming for a bride. He's coming to take us home. But we don't see ourselves as God sees us. We see ourselves as victims and guilty convicts, as opposed to being victorious and slaves that are being set free. It's all in our mind, our perception. So God comes in. I like what Jesus says. He says, Adam, Adam, where are you? And it's fascinating because it says in verse 8, 9, the Lord called to him, man, where are you? And Adam replied, I heard you walking in the garden, so I hid. I was afraid because I was naked. How many of us are hiding from God? How many of you are hiding from? How long have you been hiding from God? And hiding from God may be in church. You come into a great steeple, you're still hiding because you go to your confessions, you still feel dirty. You pay your tithe, you're still hiding. You don't come up and participate, you're still hiding. Because there's some things that you do, something about you, some habit, some addiction, some affliction that's causing you to hide. What's love got to do with it? Well, it wasn't long before after Jesus says, well, who told you that you're naked? I mean, I don't see you the way you see yourself. Isn't that amazing? Who told you that you're naked? Jesus is looking to have haystacks. He wants to have family time. He wants to have a fellowship, but we're running in fear. And it's still that way with you and me. Well, he says, I heard you coming. And then now he looks at Adam and he says, did you eat of the tree? Adam begins to double beat and stammer. He looks at the wife. Did that woman that you gave me? Now there's division in the family. And friends, that darkness and that nakedness has caused division, not just in that family, but in the whole human family. Yeah, you and me are divided because of fear, guilt, and shame that leads to pride and supremacy. I'm not enough, and covering up to cope and fig leaves. So many battles in marriage are because we don't have the ability to be transparent. So many alienations in our community because we can't really trust one another. Well, friends, we'll go back to Revelation 13, 1-2, because you're saying, what does this have to do with beyond white supremacy? The text says in Revelation chapter 13, verses 1-2, then I saw a beast rising out of the sea. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. I want you to know those 7 heads are the kingdoms throughout that have been coming from antiquity, from the Assyrians to the Egyptians to the Babylonians to the Medes of Persians to the Greeks to the 10 toes of Europe. Yeah, those are 7 heads. And then it says, very interestingly, that it had blasphemy on its name. These kingdoms are secular kingdoms. Well, this beast looked like a leopard, but it had the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. Well, we learned last week from Daniel chapter 7 that those were the very same features of the kingdoms that we know: Babylon, Medes of Persia, Greece, and Europe. But it goes on further. And the dragon gave the beast his own power and throne and great authority. Well, friends, these 10 toes that show up at the end, 10 kingdoms, represent the European nations today. You doubt it. Well, let's look at Daniel chapter 7. Of course, we saw this last week. Daniel 7, verses 2. In my vision that night, Daniel saw a great storm churning the surface of the great sea. Just like we saw our apostle Paul looking at the sea, Daniel is looking at the sea. Sea represents people in both instances. However, Daniel is talking about political kingdoms and Revelation is talking about spiritual kingdoms. And they happen to work together. Here we see the first beast was like a lion. We saw that same beast-like nature in Revelation 13. Then it said a second beast, it looked like a bear. We saw the bear-like character in Revelation 13. And the third was the strangest beast appeared, and it looked like a leopard. We saw that same feature. Bear, lion, leopard, Babylon, Medes of Persia, Greece. But there's another beast, and that beast that showed up in the midnight hour, it was a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful and very strong. We're still asking the question, what's love got to do with it? Well, it devoured and crushed its victims with huge iron teeth and trampled their remains beneath its feet. It was different from any of the other beasts, and it had 10 horns. The last major kingdom was Rome. And Rome shows up, but it also gets toppled. Yeah, Rome gets toppled, and 10 horns, 10 subsequent kingdoms. These are the European nations that we know very well. You know them: Spain and England and France and Germany and Switzerland and the Dutch and the rest of these European nations that conquer and colonize the world. Well, it's this uncomfortable conversation. We see it right there in the kingdom in Britain. Right now, there's a black woman with a baby, and the world is wondering what's his color. We don't even know if the baby has sickle cell anemia. We don't know if the baby is jaundice. We just want to know what's his color. Why would color be an obsession? Because in the unconscious world, the kingdoms of today are based upon color. We don't like that conversation. Why? Because it may offend the powerful people. And if they offend them, then of course woe be unto us. Or it's just uncomfortable. So those people who live under the discomfort of these kingdoms must accept it so that the ruling class can be comfortable. And the religious people should say nothing. Well, friends, I think God has said a lot about it, and God wants you to know about it. Because beyond white supremacy, these European nations, there is another kingdom. There is Lucifer, who gives them their throne, the power, and authority. Yeah, the devil is at war with Jesus. Friends, I want you to know today that beyond anybody that puts someone in slavery, if you go through Latin America, I was in Mexico City, and there I saw in this great citadel, there was this symbols, and it showed the Spanish when they'd come, and what they did to the Incas, what they did to the Aztecs, and how the religious leaders in the Catholic Church forced the religious leaders of the tribal people to take on Christianity. Oh, friends, it's been a bloody war. The Great Inquisition was not something that was done by friendly fire. This was done by hostile occupation. And religion, colonialism worked together. Catholicism and colonialism worked together. It was forced on people. I know that's not a comfortable conversation, but that's the reality. We are comfortable talking about the Catholic and their conquest, but we're not willing to talk about the colonializers and their conquest, but they worked together. And that is what seeps into the mind and the substratum of how people relate today. That's what's taking place in the Great Palace in England. The culture is still shaped by color, because those are the last empires. Well, it says here, in that night vision, that force beast, terrifying and dreadful, this is Rome, and very strong, it devoured and crushed its victims with huge iron teeth and trampled their remains beneath its feet. Friends, Rome, if you ever go to their great colosseums, had a place where they have lions that came out and ate Christians. Rome would actually put people on crosses and impale them. Rome had vomitorials. There was this great political strategy, but even Rome declined. There were tribes that came up from the Germanic tribes in Europe, and they climbed the walls and pulled down Rome. But these were using violence. Every one of these kingdoms. Violence, that's Alexander the Great in Greece. Violence, Darius the Mede. Violence, Nebuchadnezzar. Violence, the Egyptians before that. Violence, the Assyrians before that. All of these are using selfish plans to conquer one another. What's love got to do with it? Well, I want you to know, friends, the text says in verse 8, chapter 7, the book of Daniel, as I was looking at the horn, suddenly another small horn appeared among them. Who is this small horn? These represent kingdoms. 3 were plucked up, 1 remained that took the place of those 3. These were 7 European kingdoms, but there was 1 small horn that represents the Catholic Church. This is not Catholic people, this is Catholic powers. The Catholic Church is full of wonderful, godly people who will be in heaven. These are special people that God knows operated with the light that they had. But the systems were using force and powers to crush other people. Uncomfortable, but do we have to remain comfortable? Are we that fragile? Or do we want to be free? The passage goes on further. And I was looking at the horns. This little horn had eyes like a human eyes and a mouth that was boasting arrogantly. Well, friends, that vision gets explained in verse 15, as we've just described it, the subsequent kingdoms. But Daniel chapter 2 also helps us. If you turn there, we'll see that before Daniel had the vision of the leopard, the lion, the bear, he had a vision of an iron man, a metal man, that talked about the subsequent kingdoms. It was a head of gold that represented Babylon. That was the time of Daniel. Then there was arms of silver. That was Medes and Persia. That was a subsequent kingdom run by the Darius the Mede. And of course, there was the waste of more inferior metal, and that would be Greece, that would occupy that time. And then will come the legs of iron, which would be Rome. And finally, iron and clay, that represents the European nations. that exists today. How do I know? Jesus hasn't come yet. There's no other kingdom to come. And there is a kingdom that exists, but it's invisible. It's united not on a location or a language. It's united on not a continent, but on color. It's uncomfortable, but it's the truth. Because we have somebody right now in a palace who is now crying out loud and doesn't understand. We have the ability to reveal what really happened. As Adam and his wife were divided because of nakedness, we as nations are divided. We are really one family. But because of nakedness, fear, and shame, we all cannot find our way home. And unless we solve this problem beyond white supremacy and get down to spiritual self-supremacy or Christ supremacy, we will be lost. But let's go quickly. We see here, it says in Romans chapter 5, verses 12 to 19. It says, when Adam sinned, we read that earlier in Genesis chapter 3, sin entered the world. Sin entered you, sin entered me. What is sin? It's a principle of self-centeredness. It's what makes me reach for that last cupcake instead of letting my sister have it. It's that which caused Lisa to put her finger into that glass candy. It's something about it. It's a latent potential to just exalt self. As a matter of fact, we know that Lucifer, the father of self, shows it up in Isaiah 14:14. I will be like the Most High. This latent principle showed up between Adam and Eve. He had self, and she couldn't even accept responsibility. She blamed the snake. And you know, every one of us have that problem. I know I do. Sometimes it's just hard to admit when I'm wrong. That condemnation is too heavy. It's hard to tell the truth because you may reject me, you may curse me. It was hard for Adam to come out and be naked in front of God because of condemnation. And so we often cover up to cope. We're wearing fig leaves, and sometimes the fig leaves are telling lies. Sometimes it's deflection. Sometimes it's religion. Sometimes it's education. But the text says in Romans 5, yes, people sinned even before the law was given. There was a selfish nature before the Ten Commandments was there. Look at verse 15. But there is a great difference between Adam's sin and God's gracious gift. Yeah, for the sin of this one man, Adam, brought death, condemnation, self-centeredness to everybody. However, the result of God's gracious gift was forgiveness. Even greater is God's wonderful grace and his gift of forgiveness to everybody through the man Jesus Christ. I want you to know today, you're born free. What does that mean? Because of the love of God, God has given you a gift. Friends, I want you to know, as naked and shameful as you are, you may be sitting in a jail right now. God doesn't see you as naked. You may have just committed a heinous sin. God doesn't see you as naked. I know it's hard to believe, and that's the big challenge, that God's going from Genesis to Revelation to get us to believe that he doesn't see us as the way we see ourselves. Why is that important? Because as long as you see yourself as naked, you're going to be striving to be superior to somebody else. You're going to have shame and you try to control other people. Much of the race war is because of selfishness that leads to pride, or fear and guilt and shame that leads to division. We talked about that. The only treatment plan for that is faith that you are not naked, and submission so you're not prideful and superior to other people. Let's go a little further. It says this. It says in verse 16, and the result of God's gracious gift is very different from the result of the one man's gift. For Adam's sin led to condemnation, nakedness, inadequacy, shame, low self-esteem, obesity issues, shame issues. And we try to fix them things by telling people, don't say shameful things. Even if people don't say it, you still feel shame because they're thinking it. They're just being polite. Matter of fact, they're lying. Your shame issues are not going to go away by telling people don't shame you. Your shame issues are going to go away when you realize the only person's opinion that matters is God's. And he doesn't see you the way you see yourself. There is no shame with him. The text says, for the sin of this one man, Adam, breaking a principle, sin, caused death to rule to everybody. But even greater is God's wonderful gift. For all who receive it will live triumph over sin and death through this one man, Jesus Christ. Verse 18. Yes, Adam's one sin brings condemnation. I'm naked. I'm not enough. to everyone. But Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God with everyone who lives. I want you to know today, if you can trust that God sees you as he sees Christ, a lot of your injury, insecurities, and issues will go away. People can talk about you and you laugh because they don't see you as you really are. It says, because one person disobeyed God, Adam, we became sinners. We became addicted to self-centeredness and materialism. But because of one other person's obeyed God, we will be made righteous. Friends, I want you to know this today. Not only did God cover you, but he also cleansed you. What do you mean by that? Well, next time we come, we're going to discover if you can trust that he doesn't see you as the way you see yourself, and come to discover that he loves you so much that he took that same condemnation and put it on his own son. Oh, it didn't just go away. No, we were in Christ when Christ was crucified. In other words, we were crucified too. So the text says, but this is how God loved the world. What's love got to do with it? He gave his only son. And if you've ever had a child, you count your child's fingers when the child's asleep. You count the child's toes, make sure they're 10. You know they're 10, you just count them. And you have dreams that maybe he will be the president, maybe he'll be a doctor, maybe he'll make a difference. You know, we have so many great dreams. Only one child. Many people have many and couldn't lose one out of 10, but this was God's only one. This is the attitude that God had toward Christ. This was a deep, intimate, trusting relationship. Though he was God and equal with God and always existed, God saw him as something he could not separate from. But he had to choose. Let you go or let the child go. Somebody equal to man, but equal to God, would have to pay the price and also kill the virus in us. What's love got to do with it? Well, for God so loved you and me that he gave his only begotten son up, that whosoever will believe that I'm not naked will begin to be looking like Christ, will not die, but open up the Holy Spirit and become transformed, and the light will come back on. Yes, that light that Adam had, where he was naked and not ashamed, can be yours today. How? By believing that God doesn't see you the way you see yourself. He sees Christ in you. The division in our communities is because we all have a fractured view of ourselves. If we can come to believe that God loves me and you, we'll be changed. Beyond white supremacy, there's Christ's supremacy. God bless you.
Si fui motivo de dolor. Recuerda que la vida puede estar llena de problemas, de desafíos, pero también de grandes oportunidades tomados de la mano del Señor.
Amén.
Si fui motivo de dolor, oh Cristo, si por mi causa el débil tropezó, si en tus pisadas caminar no quise, perdón te ruego, mi Señor y Dios.
Escucha,
Dios, mi confesión humilde, y líbrame de tentación sutil. Preserva siempre mi alma en tu rebaño. Perdón te ruego, mi Señor y Dios. Si vana y fútil mi palabra ha sido, si al que sufría en su dolor dejé, si egoísta fui en mis motivos, perdón te ruego, mi Señor y Dios. Dios, mi confesión humilde, y líbrame de tentación sutil. Preserva siempre mi alma en tu rebaño. Perdón te ruego, mi Señor y Dios.
Amén.
Que Dios los bendiga. Un fuerte abrazo para ustedes.
God be with you till we meet again. By His counsels guide uphold you. With His sheep securely fold you. God be with you till we meet again. Till we meet, till we meet at Jesus' feet.